Caleb, an 8-year-old boy with a strong sense of right and wrong, always believed in protecting those he loved, no matter how hard it was. One day, on what was supposed to be the most joyous day of his father's life, the young boy makes a decision that changes the course of everything. As he watches his dad about to marry Jessica, a woman who has been concealing dark secrets, he steps forward to reveal a shocking truth that no one could have possibly imagined. His bold action stops the wedding ceremony in its tracks. But what happens next leaves every single guest stunned. Why did his revelation lead to such dramatic consequences? How did this young boy's courage manage to uncover the truth about his father's fiancée? And what were the ripple effects that this moment had on their lives? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story of bravery and honesty resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the small chapel, casting a warm glow upon the assembled guests. The air buzzed with an excited energy as friends and family members chatted in hushed tones, their eyes darting expectantly towards the entrance. At the altar, Robert Miller stood tall in his crisp black tuxedo, a nervous smile playing on his lips as he waited for his bride-to-be. "You look great, Dad," whispered 9-year-old Caleb, fidgeting with the small pillow in his hands. The boy's dark curls were neatly combed, and his miniature suit matched his father's perfectly. But while Robert beamed with joy, Caleb's brown eyes were clouded with worry. Robert glanced down at his son and gave him a reassuring wink. "Thanks, buddy. You're the best ring-bearer a dad could ask for." He ruffled Caleb's hair affectionately, oblivious to the anxiety etched across the child's face. As the first notes of the wedding march filled the air, the congregation rose to their feet. All eyes turned towards the chapel doors, eager to catch a glimpse of the bride. All eyes, except for Caleb's. The boy's gaze remained fixed on his father, his small hands clutching the ring pillow so tightly his knuckles turned white. The doors swung open, revealing Jessica in all her bridal glory. She glided down the aisle, a vision in white lace and silk. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, and her blue eyes sparkled with emotion. As she approached the altar, Robert's face lit up with pure adoration. "You look beautiful," Robert whispered as Jessica took her place beside him. She smiled back, her voice barely audible. "I can't wait to start our life together." The officiant began the ceremony, his words washing over the attendees. But for Caleb, each passing moment felt like an eternity. He shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting between his father and Jessica. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like simple nervousness, but there was something deeper, more urgent in the boy's demeanor. As he stood there, young Caleb found himself lost in memories of the past few months. His mind drifted back to the day his father, Robert, first introduced him to Jessica. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Robert had picked Caleb up from school, his face beaming with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, buddy," he had said, practically bouncing in his seat as they drove home. Caleb remembered how his stomach had twisted with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Since his mother's passing 3 years ago, it had just been him and his dad. The thought of someone new entering their lives filled him with uncertainty. When they arrived home, Jessica was waiting on the porch, her golden hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. She smiled warmly as they approached, and Caleb couldn't help but notice how his father's eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Caleb, this is Jessica," Robert had said, his voice filled with pride. She's become very important to me, and I hope she'll become important to you too." Jessica had knelt down to Caleb's level, her blue eyes twinkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Caleb," she'd said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." In that moment, Caleb had felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Caleb noticed how different Jessica was when his father wasn't around. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by cold stares and tight-lipped frowns. One particular evening stood out in Caleb's mind. Robert had been working late, and Jessica was supposed to watch Caleb as they sat at the dinner table. Caleb tried to engage her in conversation. "Miss Jessica?" he'd started hesitantly. "Do you like video games? I just got to a new level and—" "Caleb," Jessica cut him off sharply, not looking up from her phone. "I'm busy right now. Eat your dinner quietly, please." Caleb had shrunk back in his chair, pushing his food around his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. When Robert was home, however, it was a different story entirely. Jessica would ask Caleb about school, laugh at his jokes, and even ruffle his hair affectionately. But Caleb could see the falseness in her smile, the strain behind her eyes. Robert, on the other hand, was happier than Caleb had seen him in years. He practically floated around the house, humming to himself and breaking into random bouts of dancing that would have embarrassed Caleb if they weren't so nice to see. "Isn't Jessica wonderful?" Robert would often say, his eyes twinkling. "We're so lucky to have her in our lives, aren't we, buddy?" Caleb would nod and force a smile, not wanting to burst his father's bubble of happiness, but inside, he felt increasingly alone and confused. As the weeks turned into months, Jessica's true nature became more apparent to Caleb. She began to make subtle, cutting remarks when Robert wasn't within earshot. "Oh, Caleb," she'd sigh at a mess he'd made while working on a school project. "You have so much energy, it must be exhausting for your father." Or when he'd excitedly show her a good grade on a test, she'd say, "That's nice, dear, but you know there's always room for improvement." Each comment chipped away at Caleb's self-esteem, making him feel like a burden in his own home. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room and less time in the common areas of the house. One Saturday afternoon, about 4 months before the wedding, an incident occurred that Caleb couldn't shake from his memory. Robert had gone out to run some errands, leaving Caleb and Jessica alone in the house. Caleb was in the living room, watching cartoons and sipping a glass of milk when Jessica walked in. "Turn that off," she snapped, gesturing to the TV. "It's too loud, and I'm trying to work." Startled, Caleb fumbled with the remote. In his haste, he knocked over his glass, spilling milk all over the coffee table and carpet. "I'm sorry," he cried, jumping up to grab some napkins. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, Jessica was there, her fingers digging into his arm as she yanked him away from the mess. "Look what you've done," she hissed, her face twisted with anger. "You clumsy, careless boy." Caleb winced at her grip, tears springing to his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whimpered. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You better," she growled. "And if you breathe a word of this to your father, you will be very, very sorry. Do you understand me?" Caleb nodded frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as Jessica released him, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands shaking the entire time. That night, when Robert returned home, Jessica greeted him with a kiss and a cheerful, "How was your day, honey?" Caleb watched from the stairs, rubbing his arm where Jessica had grabbed him, feeling more alone than ever. As the wedding drew nearer, Caleb found himself struggling with the weight of a secret. He wanted desperately to tell his father about Jessica's true nature, but fear held him back. What if Robert didn't believe him? What if it made Jessica even angrier? One evening about a few weeks before the wedding, Caleb finally worked up the courage to approach his father. Robert was in his study going over some paperwork when Caleb knocked timidly on the door. "Come in, buddy," Robert called out, smiling as Caleb entered. "What's up?" Caleb hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt in his hands. "Dad," he began slowly. "Can I talk to you about something?" Robert set aside his papers, giving Caleb his full attention. "Of course, son. You can talk to me about anything. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Caleb blurted out, "It's about Jessica. I don't think she likes me very much." Robert's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Caleb?" "Jessica adores you." "No, Dad, she doesn't," Caleb insisted, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's different when you're not around. She ignores me, and sometimes she says mean things." "Whoa, son, slow down," Robert interrupted, holding up a hand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Caleb, I know this is a big change for you. It's natural to feel a little unsure about Jessica becoming a part of our family, but I promise you, she cares about you very much." "But Dad," Caleb tried again, but Robert shook his head. "No buts, buddy. Jessica is going to be your stepmother, and I need you to give her a chance. She's trying her best, just like we all are, okay?" Caleb's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay, Dad," he mumbled, turning to leave the room. "Hey," Robert called after him, his voice softening. "I love you, kiddo. We're all going to be just fine. You'll see." As Caleb closed the door behind him, he felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. His father, the person he trusted most in the world, hadn't believed him, or worse, hadn't wanted to believe him. From that day on, Caleb stopped trying to tell his father about Jessica's behavior. Instead, he retreated further into himself, becoming quieter and more withdrawn. He began to dread family dinners and outings, knowing that he'd have to pretend everything was fine while silently enduring Jessica's subtle jabs and cold shoulder. Robert, caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and his own happiness, failed to notice the change in his son. He attributed Caleb's quietness to shyness, or perhaps a phase, never suspecting the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Jessica, for her part, seemed to revel in her victory. With Robert oblivious to her true nature and Caleb too afraid to speak up again, she became bolder in her mistreatment of the boy. One afternoon, Caleb overheard a conversation between Jessica and her friend Megan. "I don't know how you do it," Megan was saying. "Playing mom to someone else's kid. I couldn't handle it." Caleb froze in the hallway, holding his breath to hear Jessica's response. "Oh, it's not so bad," Jessica replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Well, he's part of the package, isn't he? You have to take the good with the bad." Megan laughed. "You're a saint, I swear. If it were me, I'd have that kid signed up for summer camp year-round." Caleb didn't wait to hear Jessica's response. He crept back to his room, his appetite forgotten, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Part of the package, the bad. Was that all he was to Jessica? An inconvenience she had to tolerate to be with his dad. As the wedding day approached, Caleb felt increasingly trapped. He watched as his father and Jessica made plans for their future, barely considering how it would affect him. When they discussed honeymoon destinations or redecorating the house, Caleb felt like a ghost, invisible and unimportant. One night, Caleb tossed and turned in his bed, unable to sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 12:15 a.m., its red glow casting eerie shadows across his room. Sighing, he decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As he padded down the hallway in his Superman pajamas, Caleb froze. A hushed, angry voice drifted from the living room. It was Jessica. "Chris, you need to listen to me," she hissed into her phone. Caleb crouched low, peering around the corner. Jessica paced back and forth, her free hand raking through her disheveled blonde hair. "We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect." Caleb's heart raced. He'd never heard Jessica sound so agitated before. Usually, she was all smiles and sweetness, especially around his dad. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, Jessica continued, her voice dripping with frustration. "Once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. Robert doesn't suspect a thing. An insurance policy, phase 2. Caleb's young mind whirled with confusion. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but he couldn't tear himself away. "Look, Chris, I've got it under control," Jessica snapped. "Just stick to the plan. Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more scams, no more close calls. This is our ticket out." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Money? Scams? What was Jessica talking about? "That kid Caleb is the wild card," Jessica growled, causing Caleb to flinch. "He's too observant for his own good. But don't worry, I can handle him. Robert is wrapped around my little finger. He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée." Tears pricked at Caleb's eyes. He'd always known Jessica didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like this, it hurt more than he could have imagined. "Just be ready," Jessica said, her tone final. "A month after the wedding, we strike. Robert won't know what hit him." With that, she ended the call. Caleb scrambled back to his room, his heart pounding so loud he was sure Jessica would hear it. He dove under his covers, his mind racing with what he had just overheard. Jessica was planning something bad, and it involved his dad, money, and some kind of insurance policy. Caleb didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing for certain: his father was in danger. Sleep eluded Caleb that night. He tossed and turned, replaying Jessica's words in his head. When morning came, he stumbled, bleary-eyed, to the breakfast table where Robert and Jessica sat, the picture of domestic bliss. "Morning, champ," Robert said cheerfully, ruffling Caleb's hair. "You look tired. Rough night?" Caleb nodded, avoiding Jessica's gaze. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Jessica's saccharine voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. Probably just excited about the wedding, aren't you, Caleb?" Caleb looked up, meeting Jessica's eyes. For a split second, he saw a flash of something cold and calculating behind her smile. It sent a shiver down his spine. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile. "Excited." Over the next few days, Caleb watched Jessica like a hawk. Now that he knew something was amiss, he started noticing things he'd overlooked before. Jessica was constantly on her phone, typing furiously whenever Robert entered the room. She'd quickly lock the screen, plastering on a smile. "Just chatting with the wedding planner, honey," she'd say. Or, "Oh, bridesmaid drama." But Caleb knew better. He'd catch glimpses of her screen sometimes, rapid-fire texts to someone saved as C in her contacts. Chris, he assumed, the mysterious man from the phone call. Jessica's absences from the house became more frequent too. She'd make flimsy excuses to leave, often for hours at a time. Just popping out to finalize some wedding details, she'd chirp, kissing Robert on the cheek, or meeting the girls for a last-minute dress fitting. Robert, blinded by love and preoccupied with work, never questioned her. But Caleb noticed. He noticed everything. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Caleb was helping Robert in the garage when Jessica's car pulled into the driveway. She hurried inside, not even glancing their way. "I'm going to get a drink of water, Dad," Caleb said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Robert nodded, engrossed in fixing the lawnmower. "Sure thing, buddy. Bring me a soda while you're at it, will ya?" Caleb entered the house quietly, hearing Jessica's muffled voice from upstairs. He crept up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. "Almost there, Chris," Jessica was saying. She was in the guest room, soon to be her and Robert's room after the wedding. "Just a few more days. Keep your shirt on." Caleb inched closer to the door, straining to hear. "The policy is ironclad," Jessica continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life. Just stick to the plan." Caleb's blood ran cold. A tragic accident. Were they planning to hurt his dad? Suddenly, Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper. Caleb leaned in, trying to catch her words. In his eagerness, he bumped against the door, causing it to creak slightly. The room went silent. Caleb's heart leaped into his throat. "I've got to go," Jessica said quickly. "I'll call you later." Caleb scrambled back down the hallway, ducking into the bathroom. Just as the guest room door opened, he heard Jessica's footsteps pause outside the bathroom, then slowly descend the stairs. Breathing heavily, Caleb slumped against the bathroom wall. This was worse than he'd imagined. Jessica and this Chris person weren't just after money. They were planning to hurt his dad. Maybe even... Caleb couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. He had to do something, but who would believe him? His dad thought Jessica hung the moon, and Jessica had made it clear that she could twist anything Caleb said against him. For the next few days, Caleb was on high alert. He watched Jessica's every move, trying to piece together a plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped up. One evening, Caleb walked into the study to find Jessica hurriedly closing Robert's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Oh, Caleb," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me. I was just checking some of our wedding gift registries." Caleb nodded, not believing a word. As soon as Jessica left the room, he went to the laptop. It was locked, but Caleb knew his dad's password. It was Caleb's own birthday. The browser history had been cleared, but one tab remained open, the website for a major life insurance company. Caleb's stomach churned. This must be the policy Jessica kept mentioning. He was about to dig deeper when he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to be looking at the bookshelf. Robert walked in, smiling when he saw Caleb. "Hey, sport, what you up to?" "Just looking for a book," Caleb lied, hating how easy it was becoming to deceive his father. Robert ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Caleb's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Jessica. But how? The next day, Caleb got his chance. Robert had a last-minute meeting at work, and Jessica was out on one of her mysterious errands. Caleb was alone in the house. With shaking hands, he opened Jessica's sleek silver laptop. It was password protected, of course. Caleb tried a few guesses, her birthday, the wedding date. But nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note poking out from under the laptop. Peeling it back, he saw a string of numbers and letters. Could it be? Heart pounding, Caleb typed in the code. The laptop sprang to life. Caleb's eyes widened as he scrolled through Jessica's files. There were dozens of documents with suspicious names, Robert's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled, Insurance Policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon Caleb couldn't understand, but a few phrases jumped out at him. Accidental death, double indemnity, and payout of $7 million. Was that what his dad's life was worth to Jessica? Caleb's hands shook as he continued searching. He found a folder labeled Chris and opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of a man he'd never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos he was alone, in others he was with Jessica, looking very much like a couple. Caleb felt sick, Not only was Jessica planning to hurt his dad, but she was cheating on him too. Suddenly, he heard a car in the driveway. Jessica was back. In a panic, Caleb closed all the windows and shut down the laptop. He had just managed to replace it exactly as he'd found it when the front door opened. "Caleb," Jessica called. "Are you here?" "Yeah," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." Jessica appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene in the study. "Don't you usually work in your room?" Caleb shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's quieter here." Jessica stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned to leave, Caleb caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone. The contact name was simply C. That night, as Caleb lay in bed, his mind whirled with everything he discovered. Jessica and Chris were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They were going to wait until after the wedding, then stage some kind of accident. Caleb felt overwhelmed. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop two grown-ups from carrying out their evil plan? And with the wedding just days away, time was running out. He thought about telling his dad everything, but would Robert believe him? Jessica had spent months painting Caleb as a jealous, difficult child. Would his dad trust him over the woman he was about to marry? As he tossed and turned, Caleb made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. Somehow, some way, he had to stop this wedding. He had to save his dad. With that resolve, Caleb finally drifted off to sleep. In his dreams, he saw Jessica and the man from the photos, Chris, laughing over a grave. His father's grave. Caleb woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The dim light of dawn was just beginning to creep through his window. In that moment, as the remnants of his nightmare clung to him, Caleb knew what he had to do. He would stop this wedding, no matter what it took. Now back at the wedding, as the officiant began to speak, his words washing over Caleb in a meaningless jumble, all he could focus on was the growing panic in his chest, the knowledge that he had to do something, say something, before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air. This was it. This was Caleb's chance, but fear paralyzed him. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined everything for nothing? The officiant nodded, about to continue. Caleb's heart pounded in his ears. It was now or never. "Wait!" The word burst from Caleb's lips before he could stop it. "Stop the wedding!" A collective gasp rippled through the church. All eyes turned to Caleb, who stood trembling, his small voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Caleb," Robert turned to his son, confusion and concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, buddy?" Caleb's eyes darted from his father to Jessica, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. "Dad?" Caleb's voice quavered, but he pressed on. "You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is." Robert knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder. "What are you talking about, son? Are you feeling okay?" Caleb shook his head vehemently. "No, Dad, you don't understand. Jessica. She's been lying to you. She's planning something bad." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jessica let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting between Robert and the guests. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I know this is a big change for you. It's okay to feel scared about having a new mom, but this isn't the way to express it." Caleb felt a surge of anger at her patronizing tone. "No," he shouted. "That's not it at all. I heard you on the phone with Chris. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Dad." The church fell deathly silent. Robert's face paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Caleb, that's a very serious accusation. Where did you hear such a thing?" "I overheard her, Dad," Caleb pleaded. "Late at night she was talking to someone named Chris. They were talking about money and insurance and how they were going to get rid of you after the wedding." Jessica's laugh was higher-pitched now, a note of hysteria creeping in. "Robert, honey, you can't possibly believe this. It's ridiculous. Chris is my wedding planner. Of course we've been talking about insurance for the ceremony and money for the caterers and flowers." Caleb must have misunderstood, but Caleb wasn't backing down. "No, that's not true. I saw the insurance policy on your computer. It was for millions of dollars if Dad dies. And I found pictures of you with Chris. He's not just your wedding planner." The crowd was in an uproar now. Guests whispered furiously to each other, some looking scandalized, others deeply concerned. Robert stood frozen, looking back and forth between his son and his bride-to-be. Jessica's face had lost all its color, her composed mask finally slipping. "Robert," she said, reaching for his hand. "You know me. You know I would never. This is absurd. Caleb is just a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying." Robert's brow furrowed, clearly torn. "Caleb," he said slowly, "these are very serious things you're saying. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard and saw?" Caleb nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm sure, Dad. I wouldn't lie about this. Jessica's been mean to me for months, but only when you're not around. She makes me feel bad all the time, and now she's planning to hurt you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me." Robert's face was a storm of emotions: confusion, hurt, disbelief. He turned to Jessica, his voice low and strained. "Jessica, is there any truth to this? Any at all?" Jessica's composure finally cracked. Her eyes darted around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, the stern look of the officiant, and the pleading eyes of Caleb. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, in a blink, her demeanor changed. Her eyes hardened, her mouth set in a grim line. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "I don't have to stand here and be accused by a spoiled brat who can't handle sharing his daddy's attention." She turned to the stunned crowd. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this tantrum. Clearly, Caleb has some issues we need to address as a family. Robert, perhaps we should postpone." But Robert cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "No, Jessica. I think we need to address this now. Because if there's even a shred of truth to what Caleb is saying..." Jessica's eyes flashed dangerously. "You can't be serious. You're going to believe the wild imaginings of a 9-year-old over me? Your fiancée? The woman you love?" Robert's face was troubled. "I love my son too, Jessica. And Caleb has never lied to me before. He's not the type to make up stories, especially not something like this." Caleb felt a surge of relief. His dad was listening to him, but Jessica wasn't done yet. "This is absurd!" she cried, her voice rising with manufactured indignation. "I have done nothing but love you, Robert, and try to be a mother to Caleb. And this is how I'm repaid? With baseless accusations and suspicion?" She then turned to Caleb, her eyes blazing with fury. "You little brat!" she hissed, forgetting herself for a moment. "You've ruined everything!" A collective gasp went up from the audience. Robert's eyes widened in shock at Jessica's vicious outburst. In that single moment, he saw a side of her he had never witnessed before, and it chilled him to the bone. "Jessica," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" Jessica seemed to realize her mistake. She backpedaled quickly, forcing a laugh. "Oh, Robert, can't you see this stress? It's all just too much." Caleb's outburst, these ridiculous accusations. "I just lost my temper for a moment. Surely you can understand." But the damage was done. Robert took a step back from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "No," he said slowly. "No, I don't think I can understand. Because the Jessica I thought I knew would never speak to my son that way, no matter how upset she was." He turned to Caleb, kneeling down to look his son directly in the eye. "Caleb, I need you to tell me everything, from the very beginning. Don't leave anything out." And so, with all eyes upon him, Caleb began to speak. He told his father about Jessica's cold behavior when they were alone, the cruel comments, and the physical intimidation. He recounted the overheard phone conversations, the suspicious absences, and the secret messages to Chris. He described finding the insurance policy on Jessica's computer and the photos of her with the man named Chris. As Caleb spoke, Robert's face grew increasingly pale. The guests listened in stunned silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Jessica stood rigid, her eyes darting between Robert and the exit. As Caleb's story unfolded, her composed facade crumbled completely. By the time he finished, she looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. "Is this true?" Robert asked, his voice heavy with pain and betrayal. "Jessica, look me in the eye and tell me none of this is true." Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, once full of false warmth, now held only cold calculation. In that moment, Robert saw the truth, and it broke his heart. "I think," Robert said, his voice shaking slightly, "that this wedding is over." A commotion broke out in the church. Guests began to stand, some moving towards the exits, others crowding closer to hear what was happening. In the chaos, Jessica saw her chance. With a snarl of frustration, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her. She pushed past shocked guests, making a beeline for the church doors. "Stop her! someone shouted, but Jessica was quick. She burst through the doors and out into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos. The church erupted into pandemonium as Jessica fled, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghostly apparition. Robert, still reeling from the shocking revelations, snapped into action. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "Yes, hello, I need to report a crime," Robert said, his voice trembling. "My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just ran from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." As Robert spoke to the dispatcher, providing Jessica's description and last known direction, Caleb stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the tumultuous events he had set in motion. A mix of relief and anxiety churned in Caleb's stomach. He had saved his father, but at what cost? The guests, who a moment ago were seated in reverent silence for a joyous occasion, now buzzed with shock and speculation. Some rushed outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride, while others huddled in small groups, whispering furiously and casting furtive glances at Robert and Caleb. Robert ended the call and turned to his son, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He knelt down, placing his hands on Caleb's shoulders. "Caleb," he said, his voice hoarse, "I am so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen." Caleb threw his arms around his father's neck, burying his face in Robert's shoulder. "It's okay, Dad," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I'm just glad you're safe." Robert hugged his son tightly, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away, and it was just father and son, united against the storm. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police. 2 officers entered the church, their presence immediately commanding attention. The murmur of voices died down as everyone turned to watch. "Mr. Miller?" one of the officers asked, approaching Robert and Caleb. Robert stood, keeping one hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Davis, and this is my partner Officer Chen," the policeman said. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." As Robert began recounting the events to the officers, Caleb's attention was drawn to a commotion near the church entrance. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was trying to push his way inside, looking frantic. Caleb's heart leaped into his throat. He recognized the man from the photos he'd seen on Jessica's computer. It was Chris. "Dad," Caleb whispered urgently, tugging on Robert's sleeve. "Dad, that's him. That's Chris." Robert's head snapped up, following Caleb's gaze. His eyes widened in recognition, remembering the description Caleb had given earlier. "Officers," Robert said quickly. "That man by the door, I think he's involved in this. He's the one my son overheard Jessica talking to on the phone." The officers reacted swiftly. Officer Davis stayed with Robert and Caleb while Officer Chen moved quickly towards Chris, who was now trying to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there!" Officer Chen called out. Chris froze for a split second, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, he turned and ran. Officer Chen gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the officer disappeared through the church doors in pursuit of the mysterious man. "Mr. Miller," Officer Davis said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I think it would be best if you and your son came down to the station to give a full statement. We'll need to gather all the evidence you have regarding Miss Jessica's plans." Robert nodded, still looking shell-shocked. "Of course, whatever you need. Caleb, buddy, are you okay to go with us to the police station?" Caleb nodded bravely, though his heart was racing. "Yeah, Dad, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, Robert's best man, Ben, approached them. "Rob," he said, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, "what do you want us to do about all this?" He gestured vaguely at the church full of confused and concerned guests. Robert ran a hand through his hair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know, Ben. I guess, tell everyone to go home, apologize on my behalf. I can't deal with this right now." Ben nodded understandingly. "Don't worry about it, man. I'll take care of everything here. You just focus on you and Caleb, okay?" Robert managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Ben. I don't know what I'd do without you." As Robert and Caleb left the church with Officer Davis, they could hear Ben addressing the crowd, his voice steady and reassuring as he explained the situation and asked everyone to return home. The ride to the police station was surreal. Caleb sat in the back of the police car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown pass by in a blur. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. His father sat beside him, uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes unfocused as he stared out the window. At the station, Robert and Caleb were led to a small, plain room with a table and a few chairs. Officer Davis assured them it wasn't an interrogation room, just a quiet place where they could talk without interruptions. For the next few hours, Robert and Caleb recounted their experiences with Jessica. Caleb described the overheard phone conversations, the cruel treatment when Robert wasn't around, and his discovery of the insurance policy and photos on Jessica's computer. Robert, still looking shell-shocked, filled in the gaps with details about his relationship with Jessica, trying to pinpoint when things might have started to go wrong. As they talked, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Jessica had suggested increasing Robert's life insurance policy just a month after they got engaged, citing concerns about Caleb's future if anything were to happen to Robert. She had also been pushing for them to take up more dangerous hobbies together: scuba diving, mountain biking, even hang gliding on their honeymoon. "I just thought she was adventurous," Robert said, his voice hollow. "I never imagined." Caleb reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Robert managed a small smile, grateful for his son's unwavering support. As the day wore on, more information trickled in. Officer Chen had managed to apprehend Chris a few blocks from the church. Under questioning, he had quickly cracked, revealing the full extent of the plan he and Jessica had concocted. Jessica, it turned out, was not even her real name. She was actually Jennifer Clark, a con artist with a long history of seducing wealthy men and then disappearing with their money. Chris was her longtime partner, both in crime and in life. They had been pulling these scams for years, but had never attempted anything as ambitious or as deadly as their plan for Robert. The insurance policy Caleb had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Jennifer had been systematically isolating Robert from his friends and family, subtly manipulating him into changing his will to leave everything to her. The plan had been to stage an accident on their honeymoon, collect the insurance money and Robert's estate, and then disappear to start a new life together. As the full scope of Jennifer's deception became clear, Robert seemed to crumple in on himself. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, more to himself than to Caleb or the officers. "How could I not have seen what was happening?" Officer Davis, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with sympathy. "Mr. Miller, don't blame yourself. These people are professionals. They have done this before, and they are very good at manipulating others. The important thing is that they didn't succeed, thanks to your son." Robert looked at Caleb, a mix of pride and lingering guilt in his eyes. "You're right," he said softly. "Caleb saved my life today. I wish I had listened to him sooner." Caleb, feeling a surge of love for his father, leaned into Robert's side. "It's okay, Dad. We're okay now." As the day turned into evening, there was still no sign of Jennifer. She seemed to have vanished into thin air after fleeing the church. The police assured Robert and Caleb that they were doing everything they could to find her, but warned them that she was experienced at disappearing. "We've put out an APB and alerted all local and state law enforcement," Officer Davis explained. "We're also monitoring airports, bus stations, and car rental agencies, but I have to be honest with you, she has a head start and she knows how to cover her tracks." Robert nodded wearily. "I understand. Thank you for everything you're doing." As they prepared to leave the station, Officer Davis handed Robert his card. "If you remember anything else, or if Miss Clark, if Jennifer tries to contact you, please call me immediately, day or night." Robert pocketed the card, then turned to Caleb. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Caleb nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The drive home was quiet, both father and son lost in their thoughts. As they pulled into their driveway, Robert turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. "Caleb," he said softly, turning to face his son, "I owe you an apology, a big one." Caleb looked at his father, surprised. "For what, Dad?" Robert sighed heavily. "For not listening to you. For not seeing how Jessica was treating you. For putting you in danger by bringing that woman into our lives." Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering his father's words. Then, with a wisdom beyond his years, he said, "Dad, you were just trying to be happy, and make us happy. You couldn't have known what Jessica was really like." Robert's eyes welled with tears. "But I should have seen how she was affecting you. I should have noticed that you weren't happy." Caleb reached out and took his father's hand. "I didn't want to ruin things for you. You seemed so happy with her, I thought maybe I was the problem." Robert's heart broke at his son's words. He pulled Caleb into a fierce hug, mindless of the awkward angle across the car seats. Never, Caleb. You could never be the problem. You're the best thing in my life, and I am so sorry if I ever made you doubt that. They sat there for a long moment, holding each other, letting the tears flow freely. It was a catharsis, washing away the pain and fear of the past months. Finally, Robert pulled back, wiping his eyes. What do you say we go inside and order a ridiculous amount of pizza? I think we've earned it. Caleb managed a small smile. Can we get stuffed crust? Robert laughed, the sound a bit watery but genuine. Buddy, after today, you can have whatever kind of pizza you want. As they walked into the house, both Robert and Caleb felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The specter of Jennifer Clark still loomed, but they would face that together. For now, they were home, they were safe, and they had each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Robert and Caleb's lives were turned upside down as they dealt with the aftermath of Jennifer's deception. There were more interviews with the police, meetings with lawyers to untangle the legal mess Jennifer had created, and endless calls from friends, family, and even reporters seeking details about the wedding day drama. Robert did his best to shield Caleb from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their situation. Jennifer remained at large, seemingly having vanished into thin air. The police kept Robert updated on their search, but as the days turned into weeks, hope of finding her began to fade. Chris, on the other hand, was facing the full force of the law. In exchange for a plea deal, he had provided a wealth of information about Jennifer's past cons and their network of associates. His testimony painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had been operating for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across the country. For Caleb, the aftermath of the wedding day was a mix of relief and anxiety. He was glad that his father was safe and that Jessica was out of their lives, but he couldn't shake the fear that she might return someday to seek revenge. Robert noticed his son's unease and did his best to reassure him. He installed a new security system in their home, complete with cameras and motion sensors. He also made sure that Caleb knew he could come to him with any concerns, no matter how small they might seem. "It's you and me against the world, buddy," Robert would say, ruffling Caleb's hair affectionately. "We're a team, remember?" Caleb would nod, feeling a little bit safer each time his father reaffirmed their bond. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Robert threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to keep his mind occupied. Caleb focused on school, finding comfort in the familiar routine of classes and homework. One Saturday morning, about a month after the ill-fated wedding, Robert and Caleb were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. Robert tensed, still wary of unexpected visitors, but relaxed when he saw Ben, his best man, through the peephole. "Hey man," Ben said as Robert opened the door. "How are you guys holding up?" Robert managed a tired smile. "We're hanging in there. Come on in." Ben followed Robert to the kitchen, where Caleb was finishing his cereal. "Hey little man," Ben said, giving Caleb a fist bump. "You doing okay?" Caleb nodded, returning the fist bump with a small smile. He had always liked Ben, who treated him like a person rather than just a kid. "So," Ben said, accepting a cup of coffee from Robert, "I actually came by for a reason. The guys and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you two to get out of the house for a bit. What do you say to a camping trip next weekend?" Robert hesitated, glancing at Caleb. "I don't know, Ben. With everything that's happened." "That's exactly why you need this," Ben insisted. "Just a few days away from all this." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "No phones, no reporters, no lawyers, just the stars, some tents, and the great outdoors." Caleb perked up at the idea. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, a spark of excitement in his eyes that Robert hadn't seen in weeks. Ben grinned. "You bet, buddy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army." Robert looked at his son's hopeful face and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was exactly what they needed. A chance to breathe, to remember what life was like before Jessica came into their world. "All right," he said, smiling as Caleb's face lit up. "Let's do it." The camping trip turned out to be exactly what Robert and Caleb needed. Away from the constant reminders of Jessica's betrayal, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in months. They spent their days hiking, fishing, and swapping stories around the campfire. Caleb delighted in learning how to set up a tent and roast the perfect marshmallow, while Robert rediscovered the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without a care in the world. On their last night in the woods, as they sat around the dying embers of their campfire, Robert pulled Caleb close. "Thank you, buddy," he said softly. Caleb looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Dad?" Robert smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "For being you, for being brave when I couldn't see what was happening, for saving us both." Caleb snuggled closer to his father, feeling safe and loved. "We saved each other, Dad," he said wisely. As they drove home the next day, both Robert and Caleb felt renewed. The shadow of Jessica still loomed in the background, but it no longer seemed all-consuming. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger for it. Life continued to move forward. Caleb started a new school year, throwing himself into his studies and making new friends. Robert, with the encouragement of his therapist, began to cautiously dip his toes back into the dating pool, though he was understandably wary and took things very slowly. Then, 7 months after the wedding that wasn't, everything changed again. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Officer Davis showed up at their door, his face grave. "Mr. Miller," he said as Robert invited him in, "we found Jennifer." Robert's heart raced. "You've arrested her?" Officer Davis shook his head. "No, sir. I'm afraid we found her body in a motel room just outside of Vegas. It appears she took her own life." The news hit Robert like a physical blow. He stumbled back, steadying himself against the wall. "She's dead?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Officer Davis nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We believe she'd been there for a few days. There was a note." At that moment, Caleb came bounding down the stairs, stopping short when he saw the police officer. "Dad?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Robert turned to his son, his face pale. "Caleb, buddy, why don't you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Officer Davis." Caleb hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and the officer. "Is it about Jennifer?" he asked softly. Robert sighed, realizing there was no point in hiding the truth from his perceptive son. "Yes, it is. Come here, buddy. We should talk about this together." As they sat in the living room, Officer Davis gently explained the situation, careful to spare Caleb the more distressing details. Jennifer Clark, as she was truly named, had been on the run for months, always staying one step ahead of the law, but the pressure had taken its toll. In her note, Officer Davis said, his voice softening, she expressed remorse for what she'd done. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Robert sat in stunned silence, his arm around Caleb's shoulders. The boy looked up at his father, his young face etched with concern. "Are you okay, Dad?" Robert managed a weak smile. "I don't know, buddy. It's a lot to process." After Officer Davis left, promising to keep them updated on any developments, Robert and Caleb sat together on the couch, both lost in thought. Caleb then asked, "Do you think she really felt bad about what she did?" Robert sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, son. People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and then regret them later, but what's important is that we learn from this and move forward." The news of Jennifer's death marked a turning point for Robert and Caleb. While it brought a sense of closure, it also stirred up complex emotions that took time to process. They attended counseling sessions together, learning to navigate their feelings and strengthen their bond even further. As the months passed, life settled into a new normal. Robert threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing every moment with Caleb. He also rekindled old friendships that had fallen by the wayside during his relationship with Jennifer, rebuilding his support network. Caleb, for his part, blossomed. The weight of secrecy and fear lifted from his young shoulders. He became more outgoing at school and excelled in his studies. He developed a passion for crime fiction, often joking that he had a head start in the mystery-solving department. On the one-year anniversary of the ill-fated wedding day, Robert and Caleb decided to start a new tradition. They packed a picnic and drove to a beautiful state park, spending the day hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company. As they sat by a crystal-clear lake watching the sunset, Robert turned to his son. "You know, Caleb, I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year." Caleb looked up, curious. "Yeah?" Robert nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I realized something important. What Jessica did was terrible, but in a way it taught me the most valuable lesson of my life." "What's that, Dad?" Caleb asked. Robert smiled, ruffling Caleb's hair affectionately. "It taught me that the most important relationship in my life, the one I should always prioritize, is right here." He poked Caleb gently in the chest. "You and me, buddy, we're the A-team, and nothing's ever going to change that." Caleb beamed, throwing his arms around his father in a tight hug. "I love you, Dad," he mumbled into Robert's chest. "I love you too, kiddo," Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." As they packed up their picnic and headed home, both father and son felt a sense of peace settle over them. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions, filled with betrayal, fear, and uncertainty. but it had also strengthened their bond in ways they never could have imagined. They had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and closer than ever. And as they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, both Robert and Caleb knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the young black boy who stopped his dad's wedding had become a tale of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. It was a reminder that sometimes the happiest endings come not from fairy tale weddings, but from the simple, profound love of family. As they pulled into their driveway, Robert looked over at Caleb, who had fallen asleep during the drive. He smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. With Caleb by his side, Robert knew they could handle anything life threw their way. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Robert carried his sleeping son into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, together. Caleb's courage and determination to do what was right not only changed his father's life, but also sent shockwaves through their entire community. By speaking up and revealing the truth about his father's fiancée, Caleb showed the power of bravery, no matter how young you are. His actions uncovered hidden truths, healed relationships, and reminded everyone that honesty and love should always come first. If Caleb's story touched you, be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. And before you go, we'd love to hear from you. How do you think you would have handled the situation if you were in Caleb's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.